John Nash descends from his dorm room at this point, goes to the bar, and like the alpha cool guy is like, "Oh, John Nash, why don't you go hit on that chick down at the end of the bar?" And it's like the hottest chick at the bar. And this could be totally wrong. This is just my recollection of the scene. And John Nash has this moment where he analyzes this game theory of the situation, and he's like, "Gentlemen, we can't all hit on the hottest girl at the bar all at once because we're all gonna get rejected, and but then we can't go and hit on all of our friends because
But they will all give us the cold shoulder because nobody likes to be second choice.
the optimal strategy is for us to go and just not hit on the hottest girl at the bar, just go for all of our friends first."
That's the only way we all get laid.
Hakuna Matata.
All right, what's up, you guys? This is now the sixth or seventh take I've tried to get over the past like month of trying to make this video. I'm going to try to boil it down and keep it simple and not rant or ramble too much. Okay, I think about these four principles of human behavior, and I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'm just going to get into the principles, and then you'll be able to see where this is going. Okay. The first principle is that humans organize into social dominance hierarchies, and particularly these are gendered social dominance hierarchies. So there is a certain tendency of male social dominance hierarchies to organize along certain factors, and similarly for female social dominance hierarchies, there's a tendency for those to emerge and to organize along certain factors as well. So for men, those factors are status and access to resources, and for women, it's youth and beauty. And obviously, you can get into like really nuanced cases at like whatever scale. Maybe it's like populations or individual, and things can get really nuanced and complicated. But I think if you keep that principle in mind, you can get a long ways with it. We don't need to go into like the so-called sources and methods behind that because it's really easy to maybe ad hominem attack. Moving on. Okay, principle number 2. Platonic friendships are not real. There's no such thing as, at least opposite sex heterosexual friendships cannot be platonic, because people will always see opposite sex friends as essentially alternative reproductive mates. And the way you can see this as being true is you could get almost anyone and find out about some close opposite sex friend that they have. So it's a guy and a girl, and ask each of them separately, what are the things that you like about that other person as a friend? And you write those things down. And then you ask the same person, what are the things that you value in a romantic, sexual, whatever, however you want to describe it, relationship, partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, wife? What are the things you value in that kind of a relationship? Write those things down. Then you will find that there is a strong agreement between what the person says that they like about the other person as a friend and the, I guess, values, guiding principles that they select or choose their partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever by. So having that starting principle is, I think, insightful, because then when you start to generalize that and you consider the other cases, you can understand a lot about human behavior that way. So looking at, okay, why is it that if you have then same sex friends and one of you, let's say it's two guys, one of you has a change in any of the categories of job, wife, and kids, and mortgage, those things tend to have a very like time aspect to them. And for men, there's the whole like father time notion versus for women, there's like a mother nature notion. Why isn't it mother time and father nature in mythology? And there's, we could go into that for days and days and days, but I think it's telling because of those things, the mortgage, job, wife, and kids, when you look at them from a time perspective, that's basically the key, or it's like a heuristic for the status and access to resources question. Because if status and access to resources isn't apparent from money, then how else is it in men? And so yeah, when there's a change in any one of those factors, then men don't see each other as friends in the same way as before. This could be true for women as well, right? If everybody hangs out when you're going to the bar or whatever for singles night, and then one person in the friend group gets into a relationship, they usually don't hang out with that group as much. Why is that? Okay, same thing if you're in a group of a bunch of couples, and then someone breaks up. Why is it weird hanging out with, just one single person from the former couple amongst the group of couples? Why is that weird? It's reasons like that. So that's the second principle I wanted to share. The third one is understanding the difference between male male competition and female female competition. So I keep getting inter and intra mixed up, but I believe that's intra gender, within the same gender. And so the nature of that competition is different between men and women. So it kind of goes without saying that there's the whole, maybe you disagree with MGTOW, red pill, etc. But I think disagreeing with those things outright is acceptable. You're entitled to your own opinion. I disagree. I don't agree with everything about red pill, MGTOW, all that kind of stuff. But like as a male who grew up with access to the internet for the last however long I've been alive, you got exposed to these things. I think one of the things that is like a lot of people would agree is true, whether or not whatever your opinion is of Jordan Peterson, for example, is like the sexual market value. That's not even something that Jordan Peterson talks about. That's like a Rollo Tomasi rational male thing, right? But it's like if you've ever seen the movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe, where he's portraying John Nash, the Princeton schizophrenic mathematician who is a Nobel Prize winner in economic game theory. And so how do you sell to an audience of lay people the notion of mathematical economic game theory and this character, a schizophrenic mathematician? So they have this bar scene. I don't know if you're familiar, where John Nash had previously been a hikikomori cooped up in his Princeton dorm room, and it's the whole unreliable narrator hasn't been established yet because we are still presuming that his roommate is still a real person and not an audiovisual hallucination on behalf of John Nash at this point. But that's besides the point. So John Nash descends from his dorm room at this point, goes to the bar, and like the alpha cool guy is like,
Have you remembered nothing? Recall the lessons of Adam Smith, the father of modern economics.
In competition, individual ambition serves the common good.
Exactly.
Every man for himself, gentlemen.
And those who strike out are stuck with their friends.
And I'm not gonna.
oh, John Nash, why don't you go hit on that chick down at the end of the bar? And it's like the hottest chick at the bar. And this could be totally wrong. This is just my recollection of the scene. And John Nash has this moment where he analyzes this game theory of the situation, and he's like,
If we all go for the blonde, we block each other.
gentlemen, we can't all hit on the hottest girl at the bar all at once because we're all going to get rejected.
Not a single one of us is going to get her. So then we go for her friends. But they will all give us the cold shoulder because nobody likes to be second choice.
But then we can't go and hit on all of our friends because no one wants to be second choice. So
But what if no one goes for the blonde? We don't get in each other's way, and we don't insult the other girls.
the optimal strategy is for us to go and just not hit on the hottest girl at the bar. Just go for all of our friends first.
That's the only way we all get laid.
Hakuna Matata.
And it's like this autistic John Nash talking about, oh, we're all going to get laid, right? And it's just like, and that's the whole like scene. But basically what you need is to take that and to go to like a population level, essentially. And you have to look at it as like, because, you know, John Nash sitting in a bar can only have however many people are at the bar, which is on the scale of maybe like a few dozens of people in whatever, the 40s or 50s, whenever he's in Princeton, right? Versus now, that's like how many default swipes you get on a dating app in a 24-hour period, right? And there's the not billions, plural, but there's hundreds of millions of economic incentives at play to try and gamify these systems to get you to pay in order to have unlimited swipes in a given 24-hour period. Okay. And so that's like, you need to use population level statistics if you're going to go autistic, schizophrenic John Nash on the game theory of this interaction. And so you have to look at it as a sexual marketplace where there are men as commodities and as the so-called buyers of commodities, but then there's also women as a commodity and themselves as buyers of the commodities. And so whenever you have like a quote unquote relationship, which could be really any kind of like interaction, fling, whatever you want to call it, you're striking a contract between two overlapping markets essentially. And that's, you know, when people start to introduce things like your rating, like on a scale of 1 to 10 and all of these things, because then that sort of like informs how these contracts play out. But so that's, you know, a very, you know, enlightening thing compared to what John Nash was working with from like a game theoretic perspective. But how do you go one step further? And I think that's where this third principle comes in, which is male competition. Then when you understand within that like economic framework of commodities, buyers and sellers, and incentives in a marketplace, then you look at male behavior from the lens of male competition, things start to make sense. What does that mean? Okay, well, at an individual level, there are personality differences between men and women as far as trait aggression. So for men, if you're like a, you know, little kid on the playground or whatever, you're going to be playing with, you know, like the tanks and the military guys, and you're digging in the sandbox. The activity is kind of like predicated on violence and aggression in a way. And sure, there could be like bullying and stuff like that. But sometimes when there's physical or not even physical aggression, just any kind of aggression between male to male, between men, that could actually be a kind of bonding or cooperation or, you know, it's in order to identify what your position is within the group in order for the overall group to function better, kind of thing. Like the differentiation of positions of like different team sports, right? So it's like when you're playing baseball, if you're not the best pitcher, you're not going to pitch. You want to have the best pitcher out of the 9 guys to be the pitcher, right? And same goes for all the other positions. So that's where like the aggression and competition is like of a particular nature for male competition. For female to female competition, it's very different. It's very covert, it's very sub rosa, under the table. There's a lot of plausible deniability. It's always in this kind of gray zone. Women will cooperate in a very tit for tat manner. It's very exchange of benefits kind of scenarios. And if ever there's a time in female to female competition where it does become aggressive, where it does become visible or overt or any of those kinds of things, that's probably not the first indication of a conflict, but it's rather that there's been this ongoing underlying conflict that at that point is just frothing over, boiling over beyond what it was before. Things like that. Understanding the difference between male male competition, female female competition, and then also considering things like triangulation within the marketplace, where a male individual as a commodity is really just a means to an end for female buyers to differentiate their buying potential in the marketplace. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with that individual male is like a valuable commodity in and of himself, but it's like what you witnessed is basically just like a price determination scenario and things like that. That's an outcome of that third principle. Okay, this is already getting kind of long, so I'm going to wrap this up. Fourth principle is understanding women's desire. So you get into the whole like Sigmund Freud, Jacques Lacan interpretation of desire. Like with Jacques Lacan, it's like the metonymic chain of desire. And so there could be, and you could go even further with like Slavoj Žižek, there's like the sublime object of desire and how ideology plays into that. And so whatever it is, there's like this vanishing point of an object where you can never truly get to what that l'objet petit a of your desire is, the little a of desire, which itself is predicated upon the big other, the big A. Anyways, you can get into all of that stuff and make it to be like, oh, you know, you're in this like the end goal of psychoanalysis is to be in a state of subjective destitution with respect to desire. Okay, well, that could be true for men or women. But then when you go a step further and you look at men, and well, first of all, just like take the underlying biology of the situation, and it's like, okay, or human organisms arguably emerged and evolved in order to solve the problem in nature of reproductive fitness. So all of your organ systems are a means to that end. So as a man, your testicles producing sperm is like, that is what is going to propagate your genes. Literally, that's your genetic information getting out there. But then your brain, for example, then is organizing all of these different things in order to have your organism be able to like navigate its environment and survive long enough to do the reproduction, right? And so, you know, with the nature of human mammal reproductive genetic parts, you know, we're making millions of sperm constantly and all of this. And then when you look at the difference with women having only hundreds of eggs, and eggs are the stable gametes versus sperm are like the mobile gametes, and all of these things considered, then men and women are going to have different reproductive strategies, and these strategies are going to be at odds with each other in their means of how they get to their ends and with their ends in and of themselves. And getting back to then the desire, then that means that men and women's desire, once you get beyond maybe like the whole like general Jacques Lacan metonymic chain of desire, l'objet petit a Slavoj Žižek, sublime objective ideology, all that. Once you get past all that, then you could say, okay, well then men, they do have like the death drives and they have womb envy, and so then men go out and create and but not creating children. We don't get pregnant, and so instead we create inventions and businesses, or all, do those kinds of endeavors, and then it's enabled by testosterone and all these kinds of things. And that leads to the emergent fantasies of like the Fry corpseman, and you can get into all that kind of stuff. But then for women, it's almost like there's a hole punctured in their own ego of desire, because they have to attend to the desire of the baby, the child, the infant, which requires the the maternal care. And it's, you have to have that like uh standard kind of model, if you will, because obviously then when you say, oh, well, you can have a male take on the maternal role, and you can break into all of these, kind of like how I talked about with the principle of gendered social dominance hierarchies. You can get into more complex, nuanced scenarios, but it's helpful to kind of have like maybe a standard model isn't like a good way of saying it, but maybe it's like a quote unquote weak model. That's a way I talk about it in like a math way of like, maybe you have this math problem where there isn't an exact closed form analytic solution you can write down with notation in this short little equation, but your solution is rather this data set which you've collected, and it exists not on one computer but multiple computers. But it's like that's your true like living real life solution of this hypothetical math problem. Let's say, okay, well then the textbook math problem that resembles this complex real life one, you would call that a weak solution. But in order to understand your real life complicated solution, you have to have that other textbook worked out form, right? It's kind of like the same thing with the whole like desire thing. It's like you have to have this idea of specialization of genders from like a biologic reproductive organ system view, and then how does an organism with that apparatus have a brain that has a psychology which is organizing how this organism is going through its life cycle, right? And within that psychology there is this feature you could call desire. Okay, that's the thing. Is then if like women are historically throughout evolution responsible for like growing a child inside of them, and then also like humans, when they emerge from the womb, they require all of this extra attention, you could argue, the paternal maternal inputs and all this kind of stuff. That's kind of where it emerges of like, it almost is like there's a punctured void within the ego of this prototypical psychoanalytical female desire that has to attend to the baby, the infant, the child. That could be taken on by man, but then the man could be the subject of that, is the other thing. Is like you could be a quote unquote husband, married, but then you're really the, when it comes down to it psychologically, the woman views you as a child, as a baby that she has to take care of, and all these kinds of things. Nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's like that is a very insightful thing to have. The other thing with the whole desire thing is when you then listen to what women say that they want from men, keeping that in mind of like the quote unquote female desire, let's say to make things more concrete, women will say, "Oh, I want a guy who's more loving and kind and, will listen to my emotions," and all these kinds of things. First of all, that's not to say that I'm not, cognitively empathetic or any of these kinds of things. Maybe I just don't want to have the twin train ride of emotions with someone who's hysterical. Have you ever considered that? And by the twin train ride of emotions, I mean, imagine that you and this other person are both trains, and you define empathy as those trains having the rails being parallel and close to each other, and then having both of the trains going at close to the same speed next to each other at the same time. And if it doesn't, if it's not like that in the situation, then it's impossible, it's inconceivable for anybody to understand the mental, cognitive, emotional state of someone who you're like having a conversation with. That's not true, I think. I think it's possible that you're not twin trains on parallel tracks sharing this emotional experience or whatever. It's nice to have those kinds of experiences, right? To like go to a concert or whatever and you're both, vibing to the show the same way. That's great, but you could very well be having a conversation and the other person is hysterical for whatever reason. And I can understand and have a very acute, high level of cognitive, empathetic awareness and understanding of this hysterical person. But that doesn't mean that I myself need to be hysterical in that moment and that I need to display those same emotions or behaviors. But actually, that shows a deficit on the hysterical person's behalf, because then that's showing, oh, they don't have the emotional awareness to recognize that this other person does understand and is following everything that they're saying, understanding what they're feeling, and all those kinds of things, right? So, but going back to the original nuance of the fourth principle that I was trying to lay out here is that uh, when women say all of those things of, oh, I want a guy who's soft and caring and who quote unquote is empathetic to my feelings, whatever that means, all of those things are things that they wish about guys that they're already essentially sexually attracted to. So whether they'll admit it or not, or be able to articulate it or not, or be able to have the level of insight in order to connect that that is the operating mechanism behind their behavior, that's a whole other story. But that's really what it comes down to. And so those are the four principles. It's been 30 minutes. I'm going to end it here, so I'm going to recap. Principle number 1: humans occupy gendered social dominance hierarchies. 2: there is no such thing as a Platonic opposite sex heterosexual friendship. 3: it's kind of a more broad one, but it's understanding the differences between male male competition and female female competition. And then the fourth principle is just understanding the nature of women's desire in general. And maybe having the answer to that last one isn't the actionable part, but it's just really refining the question as best as you can and as precisely as you can. What is the nature of female desire? So I'll leave it at that.